shortly. You all set, Kyle?
Not yet. I just keep refreshing the page. There it is. Yeah, it's all set. Oh,
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and vote to go into closed session for discussion and or action regarding those items of business exempt from open meetings under general laws of Rhode Island, RIGL 42-46-5, A1, A2, A4, A8, and A9.
so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, folks, we're going into executive now. Thank you.
You got it.
Good evening. Welcome to our monthly Warwick School Committee meeting. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-05 issued by the Governor of the State of Rhode Island, this meeting will be conducted by electronic communication. Members of the public wishing to access this meeting may do so at https:// be/E1DIPQ. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If we could all please just remain standing, I would like to have a moment of silence for Shaylin Schoonmaker from Sherman, who passed away in that tragic fire in Warwick recently. Her hard work, caring, and dedication to the students of Warwick schools will forever be remembered and forever missed. Thank you. So I guess we will start with personnel matters. Discussion action on the discipline.
Actually,
Oh, to see.
vote to seal the minutes.
Oh, where is that? I don't have that on my phone. This is not correct. Not on here. I'll get mine on my.
Here it is.
Oh, okay.
It's that right there.
Okay, we'll vote to seal the minutes of executive session.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 There were no votes taken in executive session. And next will be Ms. Boney with public comment.
Madam Chair, members of the school committee, I have only 3 public comments this evening. The first one is from Sarah Neal. I am writing what feels like my billionth public comment to express my disgust at both the school committee and the Warwick School Administration. I genuinely don't know how you continue to astound me with every foolish, ill-advised move you make, but alas, here we are again. The last meeting was so pitiful, I'm having trouble coming up with non-curse words to describe it so you don't disqualify this letter. Every single one of you is either full of excuses or complicit in believing those excuses, and every last one of you should feel ashamed of yourselves. I'm tired of playing nice with you people. There is simply no reasoning with any of you. So time for the harsh truth. This year has been nothing short of catastrophic, and every single one of you are culpable, with the lamest excuse I've ever heard of why the kids can't go back to 5 days in person happening at last week's meeting. Seriously, we can't have 5 days a week because you can't figure out how to get more planning time for teachers? Not to mention that this is a problem of your own making. Literally, the only reason why any of you are fine with the status quo is because you have no idea what actually happens on Mondays. From what I've heard from other parents, it can range from little to no teaching or a barrage of self-directed lessons that most adults would struggle with, let alone young children. It's not even directly related to the pandemic, and all of you seemed more than fine to accept this pathetic excuse. Well, I don't, and I'm sure neither do the parents who have recently responded to this latest trimester 3 survey. We want our kids back 5 days a week, period. And if you can't make that happen, then none of you deserve to be in the spots you're in. I'm not begging anymore. Do your jobs and figure it out. My next comment is from Henry Whitford. Hello, I would like to start by saying the teachers in this community are amazing, but under the current program, kids missed 8 weeks of school and Mondays alone. It's time to stop hurting these children and let these teachers teach. As we talk about a contract, we must be giving the children the education they deserve, as the teachers will expect the contract they deserve. Do what's right. It's been an embarrassing enough year for this district. My final comment is from Darlene Netko. Due to the word limit, I must substitute supporting evidence, reasoned discourse, and rhetorical flourishes for blanket statements. So here goes. Regarding agenda item number 2, I see the audit report has reared its ugly head again. As I told you at your meeting with the city in December 2019, I have reasons to question its validity. This report has inconsistencies, omissions, selective comparisons, biases, opinions, and outright inaccuracies that render its findings highly unreliable and ultimately invalid. Unfortunately, because there is no live public comment at the end of this meeting, I will not be able to publicly refute the erroneous assertions that are in this document and may be vocalized during this meeting. But the most basic issue is that the auditing company compared the proverbial apples to oranges when it placed our district's collective bargaining agreements, CBAs, both for WTU and WISE in comparison to others. The CBAs in this district are the products of decades of give and take, as are the CBAs in other districts. Other CBAs contain terms and conditions that ours do not, and vice versa. Our district pays into Social Security, but others do not. Using other district CBAs to attack our CBAs leads to species, arguments, and spurious conclusions. Regarding item number 4, now that we are nearing the last third of the school year and all schools in Warwick are in person, the administration must schedule distance learning only classes at the elementary level. At this point, there should be another survey to teachers to determine if anyone would be willing to teach a DL class, so that teachers who have in-person classes can concentrate on their in-person students and not have excessively large class rosters, and so that the DL students will have a teacher dedicated to their needs. Over the past year, Warwick teachers have already proven their tireless dedication to their students, often at the expense of their own well-being and families. Teaching both in-person and virtual students has been overwhelming, and the time has come to separate the in-person and virtual instruction. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Boney. Next item is the school committee correspondence and donations. Dr. Thornton.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything on that this evening.
Actually, Madam Chair, Ocean State Job Lot called late this afternoon to confirm that they would be sending pallets from each of their stores in Warwick of masks, wipes, gloves, hand sanitizer. So for all students in the city of Warwick.
Excellent, thank you very much. And thank you to
It'll be
Ocean State.
available for delivery within 7 to 10 days.
Wonderful, thank you to Ocean State Job Lot for that. Every little bit helps. Recognition, Ms. DeAmbrook.
Yes, good morning, or good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school committee, and Dr. Thornton. We have Michelle Furlong with us tonight and Principal Brian Dillon with us. So it's truly an honor to recognize Michelle Furlong, who is the school nurse teacher at Robertson School. Michelle and I worked together for many years. I personally have witnessed her caring nature and how skillfully she attends to students' medical needs. Mr. Dillon is here to further explain why I'm recognizing Michelle this evening. Mr. Dillon?
Thank you, Mrs. Stanbrook, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to recognize Michelle Furlong, our school nurse teacher at Robertson. Michelle has always done an outstanding job. This has been even more evident during the pandemic, working tireless hours to help keep our school community safe and informed while we navigate these difficult times. I had actually wanted to recognize Michelle earlier in the school year for her efforts since last March in taking us through this COVID crisis, though she humbly declined recognition. After the events of a few weeks ago, I felt compelled to share her excellent work. A few weeks ago, a day like any other at Robertson Elementary, with the usual flurry of activity in the office during lunch and recess, Amidst this flurry, a lunch aide hurriedly escorted a distressed student into the office. The student's skin tone was purplish and she was not responding to questions, unable to talk. Nurse Furlong sprang into action, quickly assessing the situation and realized the student was choking. She expertly performed the Heimlich maneuver while also maintaining her calm and directing those around her to call 911. By the time the ambulance came, the golf ball-sized bit of food that was blocking the student's airway was dislodged. The color returned to the student's face, and Michelle was reassuring her that everything was going to be okay. It is without exaggeration when I say that Nurse Furlong saved the student's life that day. We get to see Michelle's professionalism and dedication every day at Robertson, but we will always be especially grateful for her actions on that day in February. So with this, I just want to commend and congratulate Michelle for excellent work all the time, especially on that day this past February. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Warwick School Committee and my colleagues for this recognition tonight. As they say, it takes a village, and therefore this recognition needs to be shared with Robertson's amazing principal, Brian Dillon, faculty, staff, building aides, and our students, who during this emergency situation stepped up and helped one of their own. So kudos to all of them. I'd also like to give a shout out to all of my nursing colleagues who on a daily basis not only are dealing with the COVID, but also on the doing the usual day occurrences in the school health office. Thank you again.
Ms. Furlong, thank you very much. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you.
Next item, approval of minutes of public sessions, February 10th, 2021, February 17th, 2021, and March 1st, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approval of warrants, March 9th, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approval of transfers, March 9th, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, none all. Announcements and personnel as presented.
Madam Chair, a couple of personal items.
Dr. Thornton, yep.
First, we have one retirement. The retirement of Jane Anderson, Library Media Specialist at Pilgrim, be accepted upon school committee approval effective June 30, 2021. And Jane has been with us for 35 years, Madam Chair.
Wow.
I need a vote for that, Madam Chair. Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Thank you very much for your 35 years, and I hope you enjoy your retirement.
Madam Chair, we have one appointment this evening. The appointment of Jamie Dubase, Library Media Specialist Sherman, effective date to be determined, pending national and state BCI.
We don't vote on that.
No vote needed.
No vote needed.
Okay,
Madam Chair, the last item, we have the coaches as presented.
thank you very much, Dr. Thornton.
Motion to approve the coaches.
Can, yeah, can we-
They're appointed.
They're appointed.
Okay, I apologize.
adoption of policies now, Dr. Cecil.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, School Committee. Tonight, we have a policy ACA. This is our new, well, it's not new, but it's a revised Title IX policy. Ms. Dambrook can explain it far better than myself since she's been through the training, but we are required by law to have updated this Title IX policy. Our original policy had not been updated in several years, and it's going to be replacing it since 1998. We haven't updated it. So this will be replacing the former policy ACA. Ms. Dambrook?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cecil. So this is a new policy, Title IX. It was created under President Trump's administration. It identifies the different parties who would be involved in a Title IX complaint. To sum it up, it really gives the perpetrator or the respondent is what the perpetrator is called in this new policy, equal rights as a complaint. So you're innocent until proven guilty under this policy. In the past, we might have removed a student from school if there was an accusation. This way, everyone's treated equally. Also, in this policy, the complainant's names are shared with the respondent or the perpetrator. So there's no redaction of student names. Everything is shared with all parents and students if there is a formal Title IX complaint made. So I don't know if Andrew Hennius wants to add anything to that, but there's a procedure if a formal complaint is filed to be followed, and this policy outlines those procedures.
I would simply say that I know my partner Aubrey Lombardo worked closely with Dr. Cecil and with Ms. Danbrook. This policy has been amended to comply with all the updates to the Title IX regulations and interpretations, and now meets the appropriate standards.
Madam Chair, one question, and this is for Mr. Hennius. So
Yes.
This is a policy that was revised to align with federal mandates and,
Correct.
okay, it's not something that we decided to do. on our own.
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Question? Hello?
Yes, Ms. Bacchus.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hennius, how long do you think it'll be before that is reversed by the new administration?
I assume you mean the new presidential administration?
Yes.
I honestly couldn't speculate. It certainly may be. These changes were a long time in the making. But to my knowledge, the new administration hasn't taken a stance that I'm aware of on the recent changes. So it's entirely possible, but I don't know.
Some frightening stuff in there.
Mr. Cornell?
So the feeling I'm getting is that there's kind of a negative connotation to this new policy. So like I know in the last 4 years, the U.S. Department of Education has done a lot of wacky stuff. So is this one of those moves, these changes, where would you consider them negative, Ms. Danbrook?
So I would say that not protecting the person or adult or student making the complaint is a little bothersome to me. So that's one of the major changes. Also, treating the complainant and the respondent in the same manner, is guilty. I mean, innocent until proven guilty is really our legal system. But there are things, Mr. Cornell, that we can put in place in schools. So for instance, we can put safety plans in place in schools to protect each party. We also can put no contact orders in place in each school to protect each party during the investigation.
And I would add that since this policy itself had not been updated since 1998, it was long overdue to be updated because times have changed and the way in which we handle complaints has changed substantially from 1998.
I agree with Dr. Cecil, and there may very well be aspects of this particular policy that certain folks don't agree with, but I would, point out again, from a legal perspective, this complies with federal mandate.
So we are requesting approval of this first read, and we will bring it back next month for a second read and adoption.
Madam Chair, this will be on the website, right, for the public to read. We're not going to read 10
It is
pages.
on-
Yes, no, we're
It's on
not
the
reading
website.
this, Mr. Testa.
Right.
I actually asked that in the policy committee meeting because I was like, I don't want to read 10 pages.
Dr. Cecil, I think your point is really illustrated by the fact that the previous policy was a page and a half and this one's 10 pages. So I think that shows you how times change. I move approval. of the first reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okey-doke, we'll bring it back next month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cecil, and thank you very much, Ms. DeAmbro. Okay, now to new business. Number one, discussion update, end of 2020-21 budget projections. Mr. Baxter.
Well, hello. Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the school committee. It's that time of the year and where we talk about how we're looking for the end of the year. So let's let me just share my screen here. Give me a second. Okay, so this is the finance department's projection for how we will finish this year to budget. And the overview is that we're projecting a $4.9 million deficit. And further, there's an additional approximately $4.5 million in postponed or foregone expenses that, again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's funds that we did not spend in order to trim our deficit. The drivers were our COVID response expenses that exceeded the received state and federal aid by about $2.6 million. And then we have contractual obligations, in other words, a structural deficit issue that we've talked about. And we'll see how that was built into the budget and how that reflects in our deficit. As far as the deficit reduction plan, we are expecting additional federal aid and also FEMA reimbursements at some point that we hope will eliminate our fiscal 21 deficit. Again, this would be a single year solution, and at some point we'll need to adjust our expenditures to prevent this from happening in future years. You can see what we're talking about. Just a quick snapshot. Historically, so if you look at fiscal 19, we had roughly a $3.2 million surplus, and you see that our surplus declined each year till fiscal 18 was about $157,000. And then in fiscal 19, we actually posted a $1.9 million deficit. We were on track to have a deficit in fiscal 20. However, we discontinued operations due to COVID, and the savings allowed us to post a surplus. But again, you can kind of see the trend here. We're back on this trend line, and again, we're projecting about a $4.9 million deficit. The contributors to the projected deficit are primarily in salaries and wages, and I'll talk about that in a second, and purchase property services. In other words, contractors that we hire for the buildings and maintenance and that sort of thing. But you can see across the board, we outspent our budget in every category. We were unable to meet budget for salaries and wages, primarily because in our budget, we had a $2 million budget contingency in our originally adopted budget that assumed contractual savings that we did not achieve. There was almost $500,000 in increased overtime and stipends paid for COVID services and extra COVID work, but primarily our deficit is the overspend in the salaries and wages. It has to do with our inability to achieve those contractual savings that were assumed in July. So the other big one is in the we mentioned in purchase property services, where we overspent about $1.3 million, and that is primarily the COVID sanitizing services, all the extra contractors that we have, cleaning and sanitizing. That's about $1 million, and then the moving services earlier in the year as we opened and closed vets and shuffled folks around and that sort of thing. So that total came to about $1.3 million. And the other major category was, in other purchase services, where we had about $700,000 in out-of-district tuitions a deficit there, or we overspent by about $675,000. That was offset by $321,000 projected savings in transportation because we're not able to run all of the buses that we budgeted for, even though we only budgeted for a limited amount of buses, if you will. So our tuition overages, again, this was, I think, this was an aggressive original budget for these out-of-district tuitions, and we just weren't able to achieve it. And then finally, in supplies, we're pretty much custodial supplies caused our overspend there. And capital and equipment, we had a fire alarm emergencies and things like that. And then lastly, we're projecting about a $275,000 contribution to the lunch fund. And that's an annual, that's actually smaller than normal. Annually, we've traditionally transferred about $3 to $4, sometimes close to $500,000 to that fund. So all in all, we wrap this up, it's about a $4.9 million deficit. So I wish I had better news. It's just, we just need to keep in mind that the accounting deficit, if you will, our actual overspend is again about $4.9 million, but that we also deferred expenses in terms of pension payments, supplies to the schools, transportation, technology, hardware and software, and building maintenance. And if we had spent, and met our obligations in these other areas, our deficit would have been closer to $10 million. Those expenses, by the way, we will eventually have to, we're postponing them, but at some point down the road, we will have to make them up. So then, I just wanted to anticipate and address the question, well, what about the savings due to reduced operations this year in response to COVID? And the answer is there were no savings, right? So about 80, almost a little over 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. And those actually went up due to COVID and overtime and even in other areas. So the district has actually incurred a net increase, about $2.6 million in locally funded expenses. This is above and beyond the $3.5 million in COVID-related expenses that were funded by the CARES Act programs. So I've broken out here, I won't go through the detail, but you can see based on our regular, I split out our regular operating expenditures of about $174 million. And of that, in addition, we had about $2.6 million here in COVID-related expenditures. So for instance, here's the $1.2 million in for the movers and for the custodians. Here's this $321,000 savings due to the transportation and so on and so forth. So again, I just wanted to reiterate that we've also deferred about $4.5 million. We do hope and we expect that this $2.6 million COVID-related expenditures will be reimbursed either through FEMA or more likely through the ESSER II funding, which has been recently passed, and perhaps even through the American Rescue Plan funding that is in the process of being passed by the federal government. I just also, for the record, I wanted to include in my presentation some detail about the COVID funds that we did receive, so that we're transparent and people see where they went. And again, so ESSER funding was in the CARES Act, the COVID relief funding. Those two funds accommodate. These are the three. There were some smaller funds, but these two accounted for the bulk of the funding that we received. So together, combined, it's about $3.2 million, and you can see how it was spent here. Again, as a part of our deficit reduction plan, we are required to notify the city and the state and let them know what our plan is to resolve this deficit. And again, as I mentioned at the opening, that our plan is that we are expecting the second round of ESSER federal aid to significantly offset or even eliminate our fiscal 21 deficit. We just have to warn that this is this is a single year, one-time source of revenue. So we need to take a look at those non-COVID related expenditures, if you will. And second, both of these sources of funding will have supplement, not supplant provisions associated with them and MOE provisions associated with them, meaning that they do come with restrictions, and it's not just a block of funding that we can use to pay for expenses not related to the our general operating expenses. So we will not be able to use the funds on our general operating expenditures, I expect. And again, I'm preparing to send, as I have to, and that's why it's in the report, a notification to the city and to the auditor within 5 days as required by law. And I just wanted to say this shouldn't be a shock, just going back in time. We projected a $6.2 million deficit in November, you may recall, and when we did our first year-end projection, when my predecessor met with you again in November. We've had more likely the Barton Gilman report, and I know that they're here to present their phase 2 and where they projected a deficit. And I just wanted to provide this for the record as well. This is a cross-reference table that shows how, if we backed out, the COVID-related expenditures, how we did see an increase in our general operating expenditure budget, similar to their prediction, although maybe not in the same areas. Like, for instance, we did not fund capital improvements last year where they expected we would have, and we did not fund the WISE pension in full as they expected we would have. So I just wanted to post that for the record. And again, so we're seeing this growth again, despite the fact that we've outpaced expectations, despite the fact that we've deferred about $2 million. That's my report. I have the detail there. The 7-page report is for, that is typically posted for your review, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Testa.
Mr. Baxter, thank you. I wasn't going to let you get away with no questions. So I would start by saying that this school committee or previous school committees and previous administrations, this isn't something that's sudden. This isn't something anyone should think should have caught us by surprise. Problems like this tend to build up over time. And, you could say you kick the can down the road until there's no more road. So I do have some questions, though. I'm going to start with the assumption that this year's deficit will be covered by federal government's funds. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation because, on your page 5 of your summary, the local fund summary, all the variances, virtually every district's in that same boat, right? Because of COVID. So I think the $64,000 question is, how much of this COVID-related expenses and protocols carry over into next year, right? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question yet. So I know we went over overtime on our budget, right, because of COVID. So nobody knows if we're going to do that again next year, right? But we have to budget for something. The COVID-related expenses for sanitizing wipes, sanitizer, chemicals, cleaning supplies. I would fully expect cleaning regimens to change next year. I don't know if they'd be the same as they are now once vaccinations are done and everybody, or the vast majority of the population is vaccinated and there's a herd immunity reached. So what I'm saying is, I know you're projecting a deficit for next year in the 4 million range, but is it safe to say that that's somewhat of an elastic number?
Yeah, I mean, elastic with a certain bandwidth. I mean, next year, you know, with certain assumptions, again, if nothing changes, right? If we, assuming let me put it this way, assuming we go back to normal operation, if you will, if I'm reading through your question, Mr. Testa, we go back to normal operation with some add for, I won't call COVID, but you know, the new clean methodologies and protocols. And assuming that we're fully funding our, you know, non-staffing expenses and, you know, for instance, building maintenance, supplies for the classrooms and that sort of thing, then most likely, yeah, we will still have a deficit next year.
Right, and that's my point. I mean, I'm not saying that 4 million is going to turn into 1 million to the positive. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, I think we definitely are facing a deficit next year. And I like the way you put it, elasticity with some, you know, with a limited bandwidth. I think that's exactly true. You know, when I look at the local fund summary, the out of district tuitions, I mean, we don't have much control over that on one level, right? And that was an overspend by what, 600, we spent over 675,000 in out of district tuition. So hopefully there'll be changes on the legislative side that will, over the long term, see a change there.
Well,
The last thing
if I may, Mr. Testa, I think to answer your question is to clarify, I think that we should view the non-staffing, because we're talking about the non-staffing expenses at this point as a fixed expense. You know, we've tried to cut transportation. We are, you know, legislatively required to pay the tuitions, out of district tuitions, and that's not going to change significantly next year. So, and those are our two biggest non-staffing expenses by far. They're more than the majority. So it's safe to view the non-staffing expenses as a fixed expense.
Okay, thank you. And I think the last question I had was, in the COVID response fund sheet, page 8, you had the RIDE substitute teacher grant total. That was funding that was compensated to us by RIDE, right? And that was COVID money that they got, or ESSA money that they got, right? For
That's
that.
correct.
Okay. So are any of the other, if we overspend that number, you know, say it's $130,000. So if we overspent that and had to pay that from our operating budget, would that be something that would be reimbursable?
No, overspending on all of these, you know, pardon the pun, you know, you get what you get and you don't get upset. So, in other words, so we were budgeted, for instance, on ESSER, $1,415,570 with certain restrictions. And you can see that we spent $1,468,000, $157. 1,468,157. That difference, that roughly $50,000 will not be reimbursed by the state. That will eventually be transferred and picked up as general fund expenses or local fund expenses.
Okay, thank you. So in the end, I think the message is, it should be, is that while we are projecting a deficit, it could vary a little bit. It's not as if we're you know, hiding 50-gallon drums of money somewhere, right? It's not there, correct?
That is correct. So let me be very explicit. There are no you know, balance sheet accounts. There's no funds that have what I'll call unaccounted for cash lying around that we can use to cover these expenses. We do have, as you know, and just again for the public, you know, we have you know, assets in terms of the school committee wise pension, and in terms of our, you know, reserve fund balance for you know, health insurance claims, which again at this point is about 60 days worth of claims. It's not a lot, but but that again is, they're reserves for a very good purpose, and they're not for, they're not available for the, general fund expenses. And if I may, one more thing, I just to anticipate a question from the public that may be coming with events in the news, with the passage or the expected passage of the American Rescue Plan, and again, this ESSER 2, these funds are, they come with restrictions. They specifically come with, to use the terminology, they're used to supplement, not supplant. So I can't use them to fill overruns in other areas. I have to use them to build extra programs. For instance, special credit recovery and remediation programs to help close the learning gap from, from being, in distance learning for so long, or for maybe some more permanent air filtration, and air quality, devices in the schools. Again, they will have very specific restrictions, and we can't use it, for instance, to go buy trucks or, something that's not related to the COVID response.
Right, so it's no blank check by any stretch. It's not a blank check to the cities and towns either. So, and I would just say that, and some people don't buy it and will never buy it, but school department's budget is since the adoption of UCOA has been highly transparent. I'm been around here long enough to remember the days where there was no UCOA and money suddenly went from here to there, to left to right, up and down, side to side, north to south, east to west. UCOA doesn't really allow you to do that. Again, some people may not want to hear it, but I have full confidence in budgets of this school department for the last 10 or 11 years. And in large part because of the people managing them and the fact that we have to use a uniform chart of accounts. Thank you, Mr. Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Testa.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Baxter, for the update.
Thank you, Ms. Cobden. And there you go.
Dr. Peter.
Next is the discussion update of phase 1 and 2, the Warwick Public Schools Professional Instruction and Fiscal Audit Report by Mr. Plain. Welcome, Mr. Plain. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you as well, Madam Chair, members of the school committee, members of Warwick School Administration. It's nice to see you. My name is Matt Plain. I'm an attorney at the law firm Barton Gilman in Providence. We have approximately 40 lawyers throughout the Northeast, and we represent school departments throughout the Northeast. As you may recall, we were last before you December 4th of 2019 to present phase 1 of our performance audit report. And at that time, we went over our review of the district's expenditures and review of the district's budget. And what we saw is the anticipated challenges with your FY21 budget. And we completed our phase 2, which was a programmatic component of the audit report in January of 2020. We were scheduled to appear before you to present on phase 2 back in early part of 2020. For obvious reasons, we couldn't do that. Anyway, we're here before you tonight. And I'm also here with a member of the audit team, Alex Prignano. You may recall Alex Prignano is the current business manager in the Cumberland School Department. He's been there since 2006. Prior to that, he spent approximately 30 years at the city of Providence, the last 7 years of which is the finance director. In that capacity, he oversaw the city's entire budget, including the schools, to the tune of $500 million. So it's nice to have Alex with us as well. The other members of our audit team, Carol Brown and Lori McEwen, participated in the programmatic review of the Warwick Public Schools. They're not here tonight, but we're going to hit the 30,000-foot overview of their findings, as well as the anticipated costs associated with their findings. as we go. And in addition to doing this work, I just wanted to point out, and some of you may recall this, but up until December of 2020, I was a member of the East Greenwich School Committee. And in that capacity, I had the experience of consuming an audit report firsthand, because in 2018, the East Greenwich Public Schools went through a fiscal and programmatic audit as well. So I sat in your seats for this component of the process. I understand it's not easy, and you hear things that, or you digest an enormous amount of information, and you contemplate significant changes to your operations. And those are difficult things to do. So we don't take these things lightly, and we understand that you have a significant amount of work ahead of you and challenges to confront. I wanted to point out too that throughout our work, which was largely conducted in the summer of 2019 through early 2020, it was a pleasure to work with administration at the schools, central administration, as well as the building level administrators. We had near unfettered access to the information that we needed so that we could conduct our work. Tony Ferrucci, the past business manager, worked with myself and with Alex Prignano nearly every week for several hours so that we could have the information that we needed to do the report. Kathy Bonang, as you all are likely well aware, was instrumental in ensuring that we could access the documents we needed to do the work. I believe you folks have the phase 1 and phase 2 final report that was part of your package tonight. You'll see that the report is single-spaced, 115 pages. It's got hundreds of footnotes. It's got dozens of charts. Put it another way, it's dense. It has a significant amount of information, and it's a challenge to get through the entire thing. Tonight, we're going to hit the high points to reiterate some of the points that we discussed in December of 2019. Obviously, we did that using information that we had at that time. Time has elapsed since then, so there's more before you now, and changes have occurred. So Mr. Baxter's already put some of that into context. But so a large part of what we'll show are trends that we were seeing. Some of those trends continue, some of those trends have been altered. Before we get into the presentation itself, should I share the presentation, or is there somebody on the administrative end that has it that can put it up? Either way, I think is fine with me, as long as I can.
Do it. Want me to share it?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
I'll share it.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. Okay, so as indicated, we're here to present on both phase 1 and phase 2. Again, we're going to hit the high points. We can go to the next slide. And we conducted this in 2 phases. Initially, we looked at the allocation of resources and compared that with selected districts, and those were districts that were selected by you folks, namely Cranston, Woonsocket, East Providence, Coventry, East Greenwich. We added Cumberland because we had those numbers accessible, and it was another suburban to compare to. And that way we could have 3 urban districts and 3 suburban districts to compare with. And also we analyzed the fiscal year 20 budget and projected increases expected for FY21. Again, obviously we were doing that with numbers from 2018, 2019 in anticipation of what was going to happen in FY20 and FY21. We're a year later on that. So you will again show trends that we saw up until that point. Some of those trends may have been altered, some negatively, some positively. And Mr. Baxter will put that into context for you, or has put that into context for you. Phase 2, that was where we got into the programmatic component. And that's where Carol Brown reviewed the special education component of your programmatic offerings. And Dr. Lori McEwen reviewed the general education component of your programmatic offerings. And they did so alongside the basic education program. That's a set of regulations that's been promulgated by the Department of Education, as well as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the special education, or the regulations governing the special education of students in your schools. And they came up with their findings and what you would need in order to achieve compliance with those acts in that set of regulations. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And again, high level executive summary component of what we're seeing. When looking at your demographics, Warwick schools trended more towards suburban communities, even though it's categorized by RIDE as suburban communities. What we also saw in reviewing both your expenditures alongside the expenditures of the comparison districts is that the top range for certified, you fall on the top range of pay for certified educators here in Warwick. And that's in pay in terms of salary and in terms of benefits. In addition, Warwick schools employ a comparatively high number of certified staff relative to your student population. What we saw too is there's a high percentage, at least relative to the suburban districts, of students with disabilities that are placed out of district. Again, we presented first in 2019, so this would largely review the 2018-2019 school year, 17 and 18 school year, going back like that. Those trends could have been altered since that time, but those are the trends we were seeing up until that point. For its size, Warwick sends relatively few number of students to charter schools. It has a significant number of students that attend career and technical education programs outside of Warwick. Correspondingly, it educates a significant number of students from outside of Warwick at its career and technical education programs. The challenge is in several instances at the time, many of those kids that came from out of district were going to the Finance Academy at West Warwick, even though that was characterized as a Warwick program. The money didn't flow through to Warwick because Warwick wasn't delivering the education. And also the students that were coming in from other districts to the Warwick Career and Technical Education programs were utilizing those programs less than full time, meaning less, and correspondingly, less than full tuition came over. We also looked at transportation. The reason why we did that is because transportation, as Mr. Baxter pointed out, tends to be a high number. To review your transportation programs and practices and contracts to see if it was reasonable, and especially given Warwick's size and challenges navigating a geographically large district with the airport right in the center, that the transportation costs appeared reasonable. We can go to the next slide. We anticipated at the time was that the fiscal year 21 budget would require an almost $7 million increase just to maintain the status quo. And we say maintain the status quo, that was just to keep what you had. That's before reviewing that alongside phase 2 with what we saw as additions you would need in order to comply with the basic education program, or the BEP, or to comply with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act with respect to the education of your students with disabilities. So again, just to maintain status quo, that was what we anticipated, and Mr. Pignano may get into that in a bit. Mr. Baxter pointed out what we had projected and what actually happened, and it also pointed out some of the reasons why it came up a little less than that. So there's that. Also, within our executive summary, something we wanted to point out that the district, in our opinion, and yes, it is our opinion and strong opinion, that you must explore contractual concessions if you continue along the path and you continue to employ the trends that you've had in prior contracts, that it's going to be problematic and even more difficult for the district to meet its programmatic needs. In the programmatic review, and again, this is phase 2, in reviewing the district's curriculum instruction and assessment, we saw that there was a significant need for curriculum development and additional supports so that you could administer and implement that curriculum in the form of professional development, and in some cases in the form of leadership and support staff so that you could carry that out and meet the BEP. With respect to special education, Ms. Brown pointed out that in order to deliver an education that was free and appropriate for your students with special education needs, that you'd likely need to hire additional staff or reconfigure the deployment of staff so that you'd have the ability to meet the needs of these students. And in going through all of these things, we forecasted that in order to meet your requirements in the general education program and comply with the BEP, it was likely going to cost you over $3 million. In order to meet your obligations with respect to students with disabilities in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that you'd likely need to spend over $3 million there. And that's where we get into the difference between the phase 1 component of our work and phase 2. Phase 1, we reviewed what you had and what you'd need to continue just to maintain the status quo. Again, we projected close to $7 million. And in phase 2, we said, in addition to what you have, you need more just so you can comply with your minimum obligations under the basic education program. And you're likely going to need a significant amount of money in order to do that. So in viewing all of that together, we see that the district is likely on a path to progressive support and intervention strategies in the near future. And what do we mean by that? That's the statutory scheme that permits the Department of Education in the state to intervene in your governance and operations so that plans can be implemented to bring you to meeting your strategic goals. It appears from what we're reviewing that in light of the financial difficulties and struggles and the trends we've seen in the deficiencies in meeting the BEP and IDEA, that in the challenges you have with money coming in, that you're not going to be able to do it without support and intervention. Obviously, we have no crystal ball and we can't tell you when that might happen, but at a minimum, it looks like you're on that path. We can go to the next slide, please. General overview, and we went over this in December of 2019. Again, obviously, these slides relate to data that was current at the time. Time has elapsed since then, but the general overview is that large city, at least in Rhode Island, at the time, the most recent data, 8,800 students. It's our understanding that it has decreased since that time. And it is also our understanding that there has not been a corresponding decrease in the amount of staff. And the reason why we point that out is one of our key findings was that relative to other districts, you employed a significant number of staff. That's something just to keep in mind because obviously if you have a significant number of staff relative to peer groups, then that may cost more money relative to peer groups. And that's why when we were talking about some deficiencies you may have in the special education arena, it's not necessarily that you may hire more people, but maybe that you merely reconfigure. There's other data in there that illustrates some of the information that led us to the conclusion that you resemble more of a suburban district than an urban district, and you can see that there. Again, at the bottom of this slide, you'll see numbers relative to your added district placements, which increased as your student population decreased. The students attending charter schools, which significant standing alone relative to other districts, particularly Cranston, low. CTE, attending other districts. Again, this data is a couple years, at the time we were engaged to do this, this was current. 132 going out, 132 coming in. Keep in mind that the 132 coming in, a not insignificant percentage of those are going to the West Warwick's Finance Academy. That's categorized as a Warwick program, or at least it was at the time, but the money wasn't coming to you folks, and also several of them less than full-time, resulting in less than full tuition. We go to the next slide. This slide explains in a nutshell how we came into the process for the fiscal 2020 budget. The city had originally appropriated the sum of money on the slide, 123 million. You folks, or your predecessors, responded that you needed a significant amount of money more in order to meet your programmatic, your contractual, and your regulatory needs. You didn't get that money from the city, and that's when the school committee, went out to bid for a programmatic and fiscal audit in support of accrual action. Accrual action is when you bring an action against your appropriating authority under the rationale that the appropriating authority did not fund the district adequately so that it could meet its programmatic, contractual, and regulatory needs. In the process, or after you folks went out to bid and we were engaged, the school committee and the city resolved their dispute. But a component of that resolution was that the schools, or you folks, would still undergo this process, and you'd be required to do a detailed budget review with comparisons with other districts, with a representative component from suburbans, a representative component from urbans, and that you would engage in an expenditure reduction plan. So our work persisted, even though there had been a resolution on the Carullo component of it. We can go to the next slide, please. Again, we conducted this in 2 phases. Phase 1, we submitted in fall of 2019, and we appeared before you in December of 2019. Phase 2 was in January, and here we are for somewhat obvious reasons, because COVID interrupted the process before you in March. We can go to the next slide. How did we go about doing this work? Well, we reviewed a significant amount of documentation, both in the budget arena and also the programmatic arena. And that was myself, that was Mr. Prignano, and then the programmatic people, Mrs. Brown and Dr. McEwen. All of us met with and interviewed administrators, staff members, and folks that we needed to talk to so that we could have an understanding of the programmatic offerings and how much they cost. We also, and this was part of our charge, we compared your budget and your expenditures with the selected districts, and those are up there. In undertaking that process, something that stood out was that personnel relative to your budget was higher than the selected districts and high relative to state averages. Because of that, we looked at personnel. We did a deeper dive into the material financial components of your collective bargaining agreements, just because you were charged with responsibility for doing a expenditure reduction plan. So that was a part of what we needed to do. We also looked at the budget going forward. At that point, it was the FY21 budget to indicate how much we thought you would need in order to maintain the status quo. We go to the next slide. In doing the district expenditures, and it was Mr. Testa had pointed out that we use the uniform chart of accounts, and in that you can compare line items. There's 5 major categories that Mr. Prignano looked at and compared them with the six districts, and you'll see those outlined in those 5 bullet points. And again, in undertaking that process, the things that stood out in many cases, the percentage of your budget allocated to these things aligned with not only the comparison districts, but also the state averages. Where it stood out was on things like personnel. We can go to the next slide. Again, because things like personnel stood out relative to the comparison groups, and that doesn't tell the whole story. Just because you're spending more of your budget in relation to what these peers are doing in relation to the state, that doesn't tell the whole story. So in order to get deeper into the story, we needed to look into your collective bargaining agreements and look at the material terms. And in looking at the material terms, we compare those to the comparison group to see how you matched up and to see if there was any opportunity to achieve savings so that you could maintain your programmatic offerings and still meet your contractual, regulatory, and programmatic needs. You go to the next slide, please. We also looked at your budget, and we did that along to see if there were any areas where you could achieve savings. We also compared alongside particularly Cranston to see areas where you could potentially achieve savings. And this component of it was done primarily from a financial perspective, was not in phase one from a programmatic perspective and things that we thought you needed to have or could live without. It was just looking at the straight finances. We can go to the next slide. These are the two contracts, collective bargaining agreements that we looked at. Again, this is through the latter portion of 2019. Your one expired. The teachers' WTU collective bargaining agreements, our understanding that discussions are continuing there, and your non-certified staff CBA, you have until the end of August. The certified staff, we can go to slide 13, please. Certified staff CBA, I won't belabor the point because I've said it a number of times now, but your initial and top steps are higher than your comparison groups. In fact, your top step is among the higher in Rhode Island. Why that becomes significant? That becomes significant for a number of reasons, but you also have a number of teachers that are experienced, which is a good thing. But when you're experienced, you've been around the district for a long time, then you're probably going to achieve top step. So if a significant number of your staff are top step, and top step is among the higher in the districts in Rhode Island, then that's going to obviously come with significant financial implications. And we're also seeing that relative to the comparison groups, that the year-to-year increases are somewhat significant in relation to those. And just for comparison purposes, we match that up with if you had the same terms in Coventry, if you had the same terms in Cranston, how much less it would be. And again, that was as of 2019. So things could have changed in those districts that would impact those numbers, obviously. We can go to the next slide, please. Advanced increments, those are your lanes. That's when you have, you might get more money for things like master's degrees, bachelor's plus 30, national board certification. And generally, you were in line with your comparison districts. Where you stood out was in national board certification, that was higher. Something to point out, and I think I already did, but just to keep in mind that most of your teachers have fallen into one of the advanced increment categories. So that's good. That means you have folks with background training and experience. That becomes a challenge because in addition to high pay, then there's also an advanced increment component to it as well. We go to slide 15, please. Longevity, that's pay when you hit certain milestones within your career. And in relation to the comparison districts, Warwick appears to track within the average for the districts that have longevity. Not every district we looked at had it. That component alone cost at that time the district a significant amount of money. Questions for further consideration that we know you folks will look into. Longevity payments are something that have been around for a while, and in fact they've been around They predate the minimum salary schedule statute in Rhode Island. So that may be something to look at in how your longevity program matches up with that salary schedule law. We can go to the next slide. The reason why we looked at work year, work day, class size, and sick time is because those tend to be material financial components of contracts. You're required to have 180 school days. You do. Then you have professional development days, but only one's mandatory. The rest, folks were paid for attending those. And that component relates to phase 2, because as Dr. McEwen points out in her component of the report, and Mrs. Brown points out as well, the district is in need of professional development. You have to find time to do that. Right now in the statewide schedule, there's time for professional development, but typically that's something that's built into a contract. So the work day is in the range for the comparison districts, the time you start, the time you end. Sick days, most comparison districts have 15 days or something around there. You have a kind of a unique 90-day sick day provision. And on its face, that seems like an outlier. And digging into that further, it appears that that sick day provision was an attempt to achieve some sort of short-term disability program. It didn't appear when we looked at it that was abused in any way. It could be problematic though, because it puts district administration in kind of an awkward position in evaluating someone's ability to work. So there's components of Rhode Island law now that address things like disability. So something to keep in mind as you continue those discussions. We can go to the next slide, please. The medical insurance and buybacks, you've probably heard this before, but in your then current medical insurance program, there were deductibles, and deductible, typically when you have a deductible, that drives down the premium. And then the contract states that the employees will share in the premium or the working rate, but at 20%. However, that 20% was capped at a certain number. And because of that cap, the 20% wasn't the actual cap. It looked like it at the time, it was more like 14.9%. So an employee contribution was capped at less than 15%, and no deductible. That makes for an expensive health insurance program. And so if you had a true 20% co-share from your certified employees, that would impact the calculus significantly. There's buyback provision. Not all districts have those. You don't see those as frequently. And yours, though, in relation to the comparison districts that actually have it, it's within the range. And certainly buybacks are less expensive than when folks actually utilize your health insurance program. We go to the next slide. Non-certified staff, the story was somewhat similar, but not quite the same. For Warwick's collective bargaining agreement for non-certified staff, the salaries and benefits appear to outmatch most of the comparison districts. Like certified staff, the non-certified staff in Warwick may participate in the medical insurance program with the 20% of the premium. It didn't have the cap that we saw in the certified staff CBA. However, there also wasn't a deductible. Without a deductible, again, drives up the premium. So the 80% that's going to come from the district is going to be significant. Warwick also has non-certified staff longevity pay. You don't see that with frequency. In fact, that was in less than half of the comparison districts. And we can go to the next slide. As part of it, you may recall too, folks, that you went through a programmatic and fiscal audit prior to us. In doing that, that audit team reviewed your contract or reviewed your expenses in relation to comparison districts. We are also charged with responsibility for comparing you folks among the districts closely to Cranston. One, because The cities are similar sizes. Your student populations at one time were similar, not so much the case now, as your student population is below 9,000, and it's our understanding that since we did this work is less. But just looking at the contract analyses and comparing those for non-certified staff, if you have the same terms as the Cranston contract, the salary line for non-certified staff would decrease significantly, over $2 million. And for certified staff, if you have the corresponding components of the Cranston contract, then that salary line would decrease significantly as well. Again, pointing this out for comparison purposes and to illustrate points, but understanding that that tells a part of the story, but not the whole story for sure. We can go to the next slide. A problematic component that we saw in your contract for certified staff was a special education contractual provision. In that, there was a cap on the number of students with IEPs that could be in a regular education classroom, and increased pay if it exceeded that cap. The reason why that's problematic, not just from or leaving aside the financial component of it, is a provision like that suggests that it's a contract provision rather than the needs of the student that dictate where the child will be placed. That may not be the case. Nevertheless, that provision is problematic, and it should be eliminated. So you'll want to contemplate that as you go into your discussions around the contract. We can go to the next slide. Pass-through tuitions, we touched upon this, but that's students attending charter schools and career and technical education programs outside of Warwick. You saw a trend where more of your students were attending career and technical education programs outside of Warwick. At the time we did this, it was 131 students. Compare that to Cranston, significantly less in Cranston, leaving Cranston to go to CTE programs. Next slide. Charters, not necessarily the same case as career and technical education. For the size of your district, comparatively low number of students that are attending charter schools. That's likely related to the catchment area of the charter schools. Compare that with Cranston, although a couple thousand students more than your district, or somewhere in that ballpark. In the same year that you folks had 101 attending charter schools, they had 234. We go to the next slide. Again, same point, your career and technical education center, plenty of programs, nevertheless, students leaving. Students coming in, which is helpful. At the same time, you'll see that 132 in the third bullet point. The reason why we have that 132 is, I believe at the time, 22 of those students were attending the Finance Academy. Again, Finance Academy, a quirk in the CTE program at the time, although listed as Warwick program at West Warwick, money doesn't come to you. Also, many of those students are less than full-time. Next slide, please. So again, our conclusion with pass-through tuitions for its size, low number attending charter schools, and for its size, significant leaving Warwick, significant coming in, again, with that caveat that we explained. We can go to the next slide. At the time, your special education added district placement rate was high relative to your suburban comparison districts, but it was low in relation to the selected urban districts. Again, when in looking at the demographics of your schools, it trends more towards the suburban districts, so something to think about. We would never, and your administrators would never, suggest that decisions about a student's placement should be financially based. You're not permitted or allowed to do that under federal or state law. But because of the numbers, you may want to see if you are appropriately placing the student in the least restrictive environment, because that's your obligation as a district. And we've seen this trend continue upward as your student population has decreased. So just something to point out, to look into how you're going about making placements. Next slide, please. Transportation, again, the reason why we looked at that, transportation tends to be one of those areas where, well, you spend a lot of money on transportation. Since March 13th of 2020, you've probably spent less on transportation, but even pre-COVID, your transportation costs relative to what you needed to do appeared in the reasonable range. You go to slide 27. Your per pupil at the most recent data we had in 2019, we were doing this, was significantly higher by more than $2,000 relative to the statewide average. If you multiplied that overage times the number of your students, that's a lot of money. So where's the money going? Salary and related payroll taxes, as we've pointed out. Benefits, again, your benefits programs is considerably expensive, especially relative to your peers. In Social Security, I actually think I saw a comment in the chat box and going through. Social Security is a benefit that is not available to every public school teacher in the country or in Rhode Island. And that's not something that you can impact as a school committee. The city can't impact now. 60 years ago, the state entered into an agreement with the federal government regarding how they would afford access to public employees that otherwise had access to a public pension program. Certain municipalities signed on where they would be part of a public pension program and part of Social Security program. You folks are part of that. So you participate in Social Security where other districts don't. And there's, out of the 30-something traditional public school districts, I think it's less than half that do. Again, you're stuck with that. So that's going to be a component of it. And because you have that, and because you pay in and teachers pay in, that's going to impact, in all likelihood, what you can do going forward. We go to the next slide, please. What we also saw was that, obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that you're impacted by local and state aid significantly, and your average appropriation increases over the last 10 years, or at least the last 10 years since when we completed this component of the report in 2019, was that you were getting on average less than 1%. And you probably know this and have heard it a million times, but there's a statutory cap on the amount of money that a district can appropriate, that your appropriating authority, in your case, the city council, can appropriate to the schools. And that's capped at 4% of what the prior year's appropriation was. On the other side, on the floor side, it can't be less than last year or the year before. State aid, that's going to decrease when your student population decreases. And that's going to, whether that is just regular attrition from the district or folks attend career and technical education programs outside of the district. So both those things are impacting the bottom line or the revenue side as well, which ultimately impacts the bottom line. We can go to the next slide. Summarizing phase one, again, the stagnant, inadequate city appropriations, shrinking student population, but a relatively high number of certified staff relative to this population. What we characterize as generous contractual terms for certified personnel. We think you folks should spend considerable time and energy having discussions with city officials regarding the need for increased funding. But again, and I think we've emphasized this point a number of times in the report, and tonight and on December 4th, that you have to obtain some relief from the material financial terms of your collective bargaining agreement. We can go to 30. Sorry, next slide, slide 30. And again, this was our analysis of your budget in FY20 and what we anticipated you would need going into FY21 in order to maintain the status quo. And we did that with general categories. And I think Rob nicely reconciled what we had projected and what actually happened. And it was about $2 million off. And that's because some of the things that we anticipated that you would fund, you didn't. And there were some other components of the way in which you budgeted and spent from the time we reported this until now. That changed. Nevertheless, the trend continues and persists. It's going to be a challenge, and a very significant challenge. We can go to the next slide, please. Phase 2 general overview, and you folks can see these things in considerable more detail in the report itself. And if you wanted to get more granular than that, then we'd come back with Dr. McEwen and Ms. Brown. But very generally, when our team reviewed your curriculum, instruction, and assessment alongside the BEP to determine whether you were in compliance, there's things you need so that you could come into compliance with the basic education program. The high points are contained on this slide and this set of bullet points: instructional coaching and support, curriculum, and we understand that you were on a schedule to update the curriculum, but that needs to be done. Curriculum can't just be something you purchase and distribute. That requires professional development, that requires oversight and leadership, and that also requires technical supports so that these things can be implemented. So it's not just things that you can purchase from an education curriculum provider. There's staff and there's professional development that has to go into that. And we address that in the third sub bullet point. And again, we put hiring or reallocation of personnel to know, and that's to highlight the point that hiring may not necessarily be the next step in relation to those things. It may just be a redeployment of staff that's already there. Professional development by Dr. McEwen could not be emphasized enough. Differentiated instruction deficiencies, some things you can do in order to have access to differentiated instruction techniques and opportunities, or technological supports. You'll need to obviously spend money on that just to maintain compliance with the BEP, and that expense will continue. Dr. McEwen also pointed out that library and media resources needed to be updated so that you could provide students the access they needed under BEP. We can go to the next slide, please. In the special education arena, similar type story to the general education staffing, more staff in that arena. Again, not necessarily new, but perhaps redistributed. Ms. Brown pointed out that the early intervention component of it should be addressed, and you should contemplate reallocating resources to this. The earlier that you can employ effective efforts with respect to early intervention, the better the projection is for these students, or the better the outcomes are for these students down the road. So that's a good thing to do. Some programmatic and curricula related supports that had been in place that have been cut over time need to be restored so that you can ensure a supportive and safe environment for students. Again, professional development, mentoring, and coaching opportunities, just like we saw in the general education arena. We can go to the next slide. General projections of what these things would likely cost if you implemented what the programmatic members of the team had suggested you needed to be in there. You'll see the numbers are staggering. Just want to point out that if you did this review with literally any public local education agency in the state, you're going to find shortcomings in relation to the basic education program. So that's something that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need to do it. In fact, you do need to do it because otherwise you're not implementing the programs that you need to implement by regulation and therefore by law. Nevertheless, these are things that are probably best addressed if they're done incrementally and over time, and in thinking about what you have and how things can be reallocated or redistributed. But those numbers are significant. It may not be necessarily in that high of a ballpark if you spend significant time and energy reconfiguring and redeploying staff and not merely and not merely rehiring or hiring more. We can go to the next slide. Again, just to reiterate, your demographic is more like the suburban districts, but your spending patterns align closer to the urban districts. Where you diverge from the norm is with respect to salaries and benefits, especially for certified staff. Your contracts for certified personnel. Again, we strongly encourage you folks to address the special education provision in there, which is problematic. Things like longevity, you want to compare alongside or analyze alongside your now existing statutory obligations. And then your ratios. It's our understanding that since the time we did this report, that the ratios may have shrunk even more, meaning that relative to the number of students, you employ a significant number of staff members. So something to think about as you address your projected financial shortcomings going forward. We can go to the next slide. So things we strongly suggest that you further review, and that's a least restrictive environment obligation. And that's how you educate students that are educated pursuant to individualized education programs or IEPs, and whether they're in the right place. And that can be within the four walls of your district buildings, that can be out of it, but something to keep in mind. Your career and technical education trends are something to be mindful of. That may mean that you want to analyze your programmatic offerings in the career and technical education arena, because certainly it's possible that there's folks that would stay in the district to attend the programs. Salaries and benefits, again, high relative to the comparison districts. Not the whole story, but a component of the story. The FY21 appropriation request, we believed that just to maintain status quo is near 7 million. You saw how it actually unfolded. It was a little different than that, but it was still extremely significant. You have to explore, or we strongly encourage you folks to explore contractual concessions, at least in relation to what you have right now. You have to explore compliance with BEP and IDA. That's a legal obligation. You just have to do that. So you cannot employ a strategy to save money that would put you further in the hole relative to the BEP and IDEA. I don't have a crystal ball, but it appears like you're on the path towards a progressive support intervention strategies that are outlined in the statute that permits the Department of Education to intervene in varying levels over the course of time, and in instances collaborate with the district and the city to get you back on track. It appears you're on that path. There's no way of knowing when that would actually come to fruition, but without significant changes that you may not even be able to achieve, that's at least going to be part of the discussion in our estimation. That's all I have. Alex, if I missed something significant that you think, Mr. Brignano, that I should point out, please jump in. Otherwise, we can leave these fine folks to address the.
No, Matt, I think you covered it really well. I would just stress that that if I was writing this, that last bullet, district will likely confront progressive support. I would have that a little stronger. You are going to get there. The way things are going, that's where you will end up. You're not going to be able to do things like Carullo and stuff, not with the contracts and stuff that have been given out, the benefits that are not in line with most other places. This is this is heading for a real train wreck. And I've been doing this for 40 something years. I can guarantee you that's where you're going if you don't make changes.
Dr. Thornton? has a
Just one question for the team on benefits. You mentioned deductibles of say $500 or $1,000. How much could that garner in terms of a whole benefits package?
Alex, can you weigh in on that?
I didn't get the question, Matt.
Sure. So you mentioned most districts have deductibles in their benefits packages, say 500 or 1,000, right? If
Right.
we were to do that for a district our size, how much might that garner us in savings in terms of our whole package ballpark?
Well, there's a lot. I don't think I could, I don't think I could just give that an estimate, but your healthcare consultant could, your healthcare provider, if it's Blue Cross, could certainly tell you what that change would be. I could tell you, in my district, which is a lot smaller, it was a significant number. It was in the, hundreds of thousands. So depending on where you go, if you went to, a 250, 500, 500, 1,000, there's many different type of plans out there. But I think Matt pointed out the change, just getting to the straight 20% copay would be $1 million for you. So that would be a real serious start.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Testa.
Mr. Plain, Mr. Prignano, thank you. I sat through, or most of us sat through the phase one. I don't think anything you put forward, at least to me, is a surprise. I would point out that when you were talking about CBAs and compensation, you were just comparing salary. Now, I know Warwick has Social Security, and that's fine. Like you said, you're stuck with it, can't get out of it, and that's fine. But you're comparing salaries. That's just a straight salary line in the budget. It's not the salary plus the Social Security. It's a straight salary line, correct? I can answer that. I think it was yes. So, but no, I want to thank you. I mean, this is, the terminology about progressive support and intervention strategies is nightmarish for me, as it should be for everybody. I don't think you would make that that statement unless you didn't believe it. So, I take your audit very, very seriously. I'll read it a second time to try to commit more of it to my head, but I just want to thank you for the work that was done on both sides, the financial and the program side. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Bacchus.
Thank you. I also want to thank Mr. Plain and Mr. Prignano. And I'm going to say the sentence that they said, and I want everybody there to listen to it and to think about it, because there is no hidden stash of money. This is headed for a real train. Please hear it and respond accordingly. Thank you. And again, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for your presentation. Most of us were there for the first one, and it is interesting to read and to see the comparisons to other districts. And I think with Mr. Testa, we're not really shocked with any of this. I'm not. This has been coming for a while, so.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. And I apologize. I actually froze for a bit while Mr. Testa was speaking. So I think I missed a component. I definitely missed a component of that. I logged back in on another device.
Okay.
But anyway, if there was a question that I missed, I apologize, and I'm here now.
Mr. Plain, my question was simply, in your audit, when you compared salary lines, that was just salary. That wasn't salary plus FICA, the Social Security, right? That was just straight salary lines.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you again. The next issue is discussion action on discipline hearing classified employee.
Madam Chair, I'm looking for a favorable action for the recommendation made in the exec session this evening.
I move approval of the superintendent's recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Discussion action, virtual Warwick School Committee AV technician contract.
Madam Chair, recommending favorable action on the contract presented in the exec session.
Move approval on the contract as presented by the superintendent in executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Wait. Is this the contract for the video person?
During
AV Tech,
COVID?
yes.
Yes.
I just need, did we offer that to the WISE union members first? Because I was informed that they are the ones that do it all the other times at the school and stuff like that. So I don't know if we're in violation.
Dr. Thornton?
Collective bargaining agreement.
Historically, we have offered that, but there is less and less interest going forward in covering the school committee meetings, to be honest.
But did we put it out? If we didn't put it out, I would ask that we defer this so that it can be posted for WISE members first, so that we don't get hit with grievance and have to pay double.
Mr. Hennius?
Given the concerns Ms. Bacchus is now raising for the first time, I'd suggest we table this, but I do want to be clear. It certainly doesn't mean we have to post it at all. I just need to do the research to see what has been done historically.
Just historically, we have given it to WISE folks.
We may not be legally required to do so. I just want to check.
Right. I just don't want to get the district
Just
in
table,
trouble.
we table this?
That, my suggestion would be to table it.
Okay. We can,
Dr. Thornton?
Just to be clear, we can certainly table, but in interacting with the tech leadership, there's been less and less interest in the WISE members covering school committee meetings, period. That's been their position. We can ask again.
I would think this is a little bit more.
And to your point, Madam Chair, I think that's why my initial reaction would be this is not something that would have to be offered to WISE, and in fact is more
Well, it's-
appropriate for, as we all discussed.
It's in the admin building and they've had to do a lot of technical work on their part. I think it's different than what goes on at the school, but I'm willing to table it on your advice.
Just so I can verify, just to make sure there isn't a problem. I would
Okay.
be surprised if there is, though.
Okay, thank you. So
Madam Chair,
table.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms.
I just had a question. So, but hasn't somebody already been appointed to this position? Because this is the contract. Dr. Thornton, have you already appointed somebody to this position?
The point tonight was to bring this to you for consideration for that task.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Cornell, it's specifically for COVID while we're doing meetings like this and not at Warwick Vets.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's just my question, because the school committee approves the contracts, but we don't do the appointments. So I was wondering if somebody was already appointed.
No, and Mr. Cornell, I do believe this is significantly different. I don't expect this to be a WISE issue, quite frankly. But I am hearing about it for the first time. So if there's not an extreme urgency to it, I would like to just double check and circle back with Dr. Thornton tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, since we're going to table that, we'll go on to number 4, the discussion update for elementary in-person trimester 3 survey results. Ms. DeAmbro. She's muted. Oh, your mic is you need to put your mic on.
Madam Chair, members of the school committee, as you know, we shared a survey after February vacation to ask parents what their preferences for learning in the third trimester. So the second trimester, they made their choice, which they had to stick with throughout the second trimester. Now is their chance to make a change if they feel that they would like to do so. I'm going to share my screen. So an opt-in, opt-out survey was sent to all elementary families seeking their preference for either in-person learning for trimester 3 or distance learning for trimester 3. We received 2,520 responses, which is about 71% of our elementary students. We currently have about 3,600. So the principals are working. The survey closed on Friday, March 5th. So the principals have been working on the parents who didn't respond or the guardians who didn't respond to see what their choice is. So out of the 2,520 responses, this is 71% of elementary students, as I said, and 357 students requested a change out of the 2,520 survey from their second trimester learning choice. This represents 14% of students. So some of the 2,520 responses, they just wanted to stay the same, but 357 families wanted a change. So out of 321 of the 2,520 wanted to move from distance learning to in-person learning, which is a 13% of the respondents choosing that. From the 357 respondents that wanted change, 321 of them chose distance learning, a change from distance learning to in-person learning, which is a 90% change. 36 out of 357 respondents that wanted change moved from in-person to distance learning. And that's the 10% at the bottom of the screen that you see, the 36 out of the 321 who wanted the change. But out of the 2,520 responses, only 36 wanted to move from in-person to distance learning, which gives you a 1% of the respondents that wanted the distance learning. So that's a big difference. As you can see, 90% wanted a change to distance learning, to in-person learning, and 10% wanted the change from in-person learning to distance learning. So of the 2,520 responses, 2,163 opted to not make a change in their decision for trimester 3. They were happy with the decision they made for trimester 2. 1,795 opted to remain in person, which is 83%. 368, approximately 27%, opted to remain in distance learning. So this means at the start of trimester 3, with the 71%, I just want to remind you, there's only 71% respondents. So we will be, again, chasing the other parents and guardians who haven't responded to hear their request. But as of today, approximately 84% of the students will be in person, and approximately 16% of students will be doing distance learning in trimester 3. So I will be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Testa?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Stanbrook. Just one question. Do the additional people going full in person have any impact on our ability to pull it off with classes and whatnot?
Yep. So the Principals have been utilizing Monday and Tuesday, and by tomorrow morning, they'll finish finalizing the total amount. We are missing some responses. So there are some classes that are approaching that 20 people or 20 students and 19 students and one teacher in a classroom. The co-taught classrooms would be 18 students and 2 teachers. So yes, there are some schools and some classrooms that are close to that point. I will be meeting with each principal individually to review their numbers and to answer your question that more staff would have to be hired, more classrooms would have to be hired, but it's not a significant amount.
And that we're not going to change any of the protocols that we've currently had in place with cleaning and masking and everything else. And I think that, you know, the success from January has essentially shown that the protocols we have in place work. So I'm pleased, and I'm pleased that that significant number of parents decided that they wanted to go back into in-person. So thank you.
I do think that's a good sign moving forward. It's a predictor of our future. But I do think parents feel more comfortable with all the safeguards we have in place to bring their children back into the school setting. And if any teacher has an issue or concern about social distancing, again, Mr. Oliver and myself have offered to go to the school and support the teacher. They might need a different classroom, so we will be supporting the principals and the teachers in that manner. But like I said, it will be a minimum amount of teachers. There will be, there might be one teacher that has 14 students in total, and there might be another teacher in the same grade that's going to be having 22 students in total. So, you know, we might have to move some students of the distance learners who are coming back. We wouldn't change their school, but we might have to move their teacher. And that was also put on the survey, so it was understood to parents ahead of time.
Thank you, Ms. Stambrook. That was my question. Are parents aware of that?
Yes.
So it was specifically told to them that they could land up having a different teacher.
Right, it was right in the directions of the survey, right up top. Dr. Taylor, I want to thank you for your help with putting together the survey and helping analyzing the survey.
Thank you very much. Ms. Blockus?
I'm not trying to bust anybody's beans, but what does this do for elementary going back 5 days a week, or can anything like that happen? Because I continue to get angry parents, you know, writing and calling me.
Yep. So I think Dr. Thornton wanted to speak on that in relationship to my presentation.
Yeah, a good segue. If I can back, so first, like we just add, late today, we got word that we will be getting vaccine clinics in the city, and they have their Pfizer vaccine, and it'll be the next 6 Saturdays. So you go to the first 3 of the first dose, second 3 of the second dose, and I'm hopeful, you know, at that point we have you know, all the folks vaccinated, and we can certainly have the conversations whether it's you know, going back. In fact, I think at least 4.5 days we could, I think, look at, and then middle high, you know, considering going back 5 days. But given this good news today, I think you know, right now an email went out around, I think now 2.5 hours ago to our employees. So hopefully at this point, folks are signing up, and you know, after the shots are completed, I think we're in a real different place in Warwick.
And Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton.
As far as the inoculations, that's for, the Pfizer is a 2-stage, so we're thinking it will take at least a month, right?
Well, right now, if we go the next 3 Saturdays, March 13, March 20, March 27, that's the first shot in the arm. And that's all public and private, everyone in Warwick, teacher assistants, lunch aides, teachers, administrators, everyone, school committee members. what I'm saying is after we have both doses and we go to after that, then we are fully, have our, dose. We can then, I think, have the conversation about our spring schedule and how we can finish the year strong.
Have
And,
we,
and in fact, at this point, I think that there are a lot of variables for the elementary school. I know folks get frustrated with us, but we simply can't, at this point, go back to 5 days without causing a lot of problems in districts. I think we could support 4.5 days. And that's something I think we'll look at.
thank you.
Madam,
Yes, Ms. Stanbrook.
so I will, next meeting, I will have final results of the survey and of how many students will be attending in person, how many students will continue with distance learning. As I said several times, we only have a 71% return of responses. And I also would have information about how many more sections or teachers that are needed to be added. So I will provide an update at the next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Stanbrook. I do
Madam
have a
Chair?
question about the distance learners. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go first, Mr. Adams.
All right, I have two. One for Ms. Stanbrook, one for Dr. Thornton. So, Ms. Stanbrook, just in terms of students that might need to change teachers if they are to go in person, if the parent, obviously the student, are not okay with that, do they have the option? Like, I mean, the only other option would be to go to DL to keep that teacher, correct?
Correct.
Would they be able to change their mind if that be the case?
Yes, I certainly would work with those parents. If it would be more upsetting to change the teacher and go to in-person learning than to stay home and continue distance learning with the same teacher. Many of our teachers do work together and plan together and do a lot of things together. So, but last time when we did invited people back into the school for in-person learning, it was very minimum, the number of students that had to be changed. I would say it happened at 2 schools.
Right. I just want to like put that out there in case it does happen, like that like cushion, the safeguard is there in place for those parents that like that unfortunately it might happen to. So Dr. Thornton, my question for you in terms of the vaccines, I just want to make sure, is there enough for all the faculty, staff, and et cetera, et cetera? Like, will we be getting enough?
Right now, the state has done a survey, as you may have heard, and what they reported out was roughly 30% of the individuals who responded either already have a shot or are scheduled for a shot, and another 15% may not want to get a shot. Right now, Warwick is going to get over 1,200 doses over the next 3 weeks for the clinics. And based on the calculations, we do believe that is what we need. Certainly, if we're coming up short, I'll be working with the EMA folks to advocate for more. But keep in mind, this is Henderson, St. Kevin's, Warwick Public Schools. It's all the schools in Warwick, and that's the state's best estimate right now, today, March 9th. What we need. I think it's really a moving target, and if we are short, we'd certainly advocate to get more.
All right, cool. I just wanted to make sure that was accounted for. Thank you very much.
Mark, I'm going to ask my question now, Ms. Stanbrook. With the once the classes are filling up, what is going to happen with distance learning? Is it going to be continued being taught by the in-class teacher?
Yes, distance learning will still continue to be taught by the classroom teacher. We just don't have the funds or even the bodies to hire distance learning teachers.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question. Ms. Stanbrook, what you're talking 350, call it 350 kids over 5 grades too, right? So my quick math is about 70 students per grade over how many elementary schools? So it could be, I mean, I trust you guys will take care of it and do it the right way. And I think you've already said impact should be minimal, but there may be impact, and you did spell it out. And Dr. Thornton, I would just say that the news on the vaccinations to me is vaccinating staff is a game changer for me. And it can't happen fast enough. I would, in a perfect world, we would have gotten the J&J vaccine, one shot and done. But I agree with you. I think with a fully vaccinated staff, we can change the whole dynamic, and I would look to go secondary in 5 days a week, because I think it can be done with a vaccinated staff. So, but we're at the mercy of the state, right? They're going to tell us how many doses you have. It's not something we control.
Right now, we heard today, we're going to get, over 400, it must be used by the 15th of March, and that's the first allocation coming in. If we had our way, we would have done a much longer, larger clinic and tried to get more folks done quickly. So with J&J, we have choice, but it's Pfizer, and we're getting 3 different shipments right now.
We already had infrastructure in place, which made it, pretty good for us. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I have another question as well.
Yes, Mr. Adams?
It's more along the lines of like what I remember Dr. Thornton telling us a while ago, is that students that wanted to remain in distance learning could stay. Will that still be an option for them as well?
That's correct. For the balance of the year, even talking with our RIDE conference calls with the state, that is something that our districts are affording families for the balance of this year, yes.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Dr. Thornton, I do have a question for you. It's similar to what Mr. Adams just brought up. Do you foresee them changing the guidelines on the separation as far as the distancing of children in a classroom, or any of the other guidelines that they put on how many kids we could have in a classroom?
Yeah, to me, not being in the CDC conversations, but talking to, various individuals, I do personally see, I think, a change in thinking once we have a vaccinated teaching force in terms of the guidance, because I think that's really the elements holding back schools across the country. So yeah, to me, I do think in the spring, we'll see the CDC, I think, clarify some of their guidance.
You think they'll change that? Okay, thank you. That's my question. Any other questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Cornell.
Yeah, so Dr. Thornton, I just would like to thank you for getting this done. I know you've been trying to do this for a while, and the vaccines haven't been as quick as they should, and that's, of course, and that's all on the state. But thank you for doing this. This is a great thing, and I think it allows for a lot of possibilities in the future now that we're getting our staff vaccinated. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, with no other questions, I don't see anybody else's hand up. We'll go on to the next item, discussion update on district strategic plan timeline.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the school committee. As you may know, the district strategic plan was written in 2018 and does expire in 2021. So the administrative team started looking at a timeline and a thoughtful way to include members of the community and to have a steering committee and to set priorities and celebrate our successes. So Dr. Cecil has agreed to lead this charge, and Mrs. Amelet has also been a facilitator with this work. So Dr. Cecil?
Yes, I'm going to defer first to Mrs. Amelet to start the discussion.
I was going to share my screen so we can see the process. Thank you, Dr. Cecil. First of all, I can't thank our team enough at the curriculum department and working with the administration team at Gorton, because we really thoughtfully wanted to put together a process that was inclusive and allowed for time to hear different stakeholders, and as well as what Mrs. Denbrook said, to take in our celebrations. As our last strategic plan, there were many milestones that we did accomplish and that we're currently working on and would need to continue. And so we really want to make sure that we're sharing that. Along that line, that we'd also be working on our vision of a learner milestones, so that we would be in, so we'd have those as a foundation for the work of our strategic plan, as well as for our NEASC reports for our two high schools. So in April, we'd be developing that design team, working with the district team to really design the process of like, we're going to be looking at data, but this process is very iterative. So we're going to go back and forth to be able to have many voices share what they would like to, where they want Warwick Public Schools to go, and and so we can take their feedback and put it out into initiatives. And so we'd be reviewing our current district strategic plan, again, looking at our celebrations and where we need to move next. We'd also be looking at data. Again, at the beginning, we're also asking our principals and our teachers to participate in survey works. Our students, our families, and our staff can participate in survey works, which gives us a great amount of data that can be compared to districts in Rhode Island as well as around the country. Then in August and September, we would be running focus groups with different stakeholders to really look at, to dig in deep on different areas. And we'd be bringing that plan back so that you would hear it several times, and we'd be able to make, as a draft, we'd be able to make needed changes before we implemented that plan in January. And again, with a dashboard, as it's been mentioned, just creating something isn't enough. Really a lot of work and implementation to really make that a success. So again, I thank my team, as well as being part of this curriculum, this district team in working in looking forward to the future of Warwick Public Schools.
And different from the last time we did the strategic plan, this time we're going to be taking the ideas or the recommendations from the focus groups and then developing the plan, and then going back to those focus groups to get feedback on the plan, bringing it back one more time before we bring it forward to the school committee and the community at large as the final plan. So that every step of the way we're getting community input, what should be in the plan, and then after the draft plan is written, any changes that need to be made to the plan before it goes forward. The other thing to note here is that there's a column for the schools, because we want the schools to parallel the process with their school improvement plans as we are doing with the district strategic plan. So they're following, or will be following, similar timelines and activities, but within their school buildings to create their plans that will align with the district plan. And so we'll be keeping you abreast as we go through this process. And some of you will be, all of you will be participating in some form or fashion on, in one committee or another. We'll take any questions.
I do have one,
Okay,
Madam
Mr.
Chair, thank you. So Dr. Cecil and Ms. Amelot, outreach to parents and members of the community, that's all going to be spearheaded by the team you put together, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so, we want to cast as wide a net as we possibly can. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So, thank you.
Well, and that's again why we, all of our stakeholders at our schools can participate in survey works, which provides us a great opportunity to get many stakeholders' voices heard about things that really on how we're doing at the schools and where they would like to see us kind of move forward. So that's why that closes on March 31st. So we're really encouraging all families and staff and our students in K through 12 to take that survey.
Okay, thank you.
And right now, the steering team is thoughtfully planning on how to recruit or how to outreach to have people participate on these committees or these buckets and the process for developing the plan. So it's a whole process to go through this process to develop the plan. And we're meeting every other week now to move this along. So it is a time-consuming process and it's a commitment. but we're very serious about it. And after listening to this report tonight, that gives us even more food for thought and even more urgency, I would say, that we need to really get this plan moving.
And the fact that you can Zoom, I think makes it easier for the public, particularly parents, I think, to participate if you can do it remotely. So,
Yeah.
nice, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. Next discussion and update, transportation, Mr. Baxter.
Thank you, pardon me. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the school committee. All right, just present. All right, so do you see my screen? See the transportation update slide?
No.
No, okay, I missed it. Pardon me. There, share screen. Got it. Okay, now you see it, right?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so again, this is an important topic, and that's why I'm happy that it's on the agenda every month so that we can continue to report back. It's very dynamic, and we continue to make changes. Again, just to recap the situation, and this is the same slide we start with every month. You know, we essentially we have 30 buses. You know, we have you know, need almost 100 buses. So, you know, we've made some changes, and you know, we're in the process, as we said, of streamlining our routes, which you've done, and where we're at is for elementary, you know, K through 5, our busing began Tuesday, February 23rd, and we've been asking everyone in our community to be understanding with us and with everyone else, because it's very easy sometimes for parents, and I get it. I've been there. I'm a parent. It's very easy to be focused on my stop, my kid's stop, without seeing the impact of the bus, because the bus is coming from another school and going to another school after this run. So, you know, we're genuinely asking everyone in the community to be understanding with us. We've, you know, we hear calls, and there are hardship cases, true hardship cases out there. And, you know, I wish we could help everyone, but, you know, we're doing the best we can, and we won't be able to help everyone. The routes are significantly different from prior years. This is something to keep in mind, and that, you know, change is difficult. And so it's difficult for the drivers. It's difficult for, again, the families. It's difficult for the schools. So we need to be cognizant. I just want to reiterate, you know, that these routes are significantly different, and most likely will continue to be different even as we move into next school year. It's resulted in congestion in parking lots because of the longer walking distances. The schools have been great at adapting their drop-off times, and we continue to make adjustments at the schools to allow for earlier drop-offs and that sort of thing, but all within our window. So again, we started on the 23rd. My point is that we're not done. We continue to work. We continue to improve. You know, because we're into new territory here, dynamic, you know, dynamic process. And again, I just want to encourage the community to be patient with us. Middle school, while we do continue to look for alternatives, and we thought we had an alternative, but it fell through. So we currently have no solution for middle school transportation. And again, you know, but we are continuing to look to see what we can do. CTC is a better picture for the Career Center. We established, our team established a crosstown shuttle. In the morning, it picks up folks from the, you know, the eastern side of town and at Pilgrim, and it brings everybody over to, I think it's about 87 students over to the Career Center. And on the way home, those 4 buses, I drop, and they split and they go to 3 local afternoon drop-offs so that it puts the kids closer to their homes, hopefully within a reasonable walking distance. So that's what we're doing there. One's at Oakland Beach, one's off of Church Ave, and the other is still at Pilgrim. High school, I'm encouraged here. We've been working with RIPTA. We talk to them quite regularly now. We purchased 130 bus passes. We contacted 433 families directly. Again, a yeoman's effort on the part of the transportation team. And out of those 400, we started with the families furthest away from the schools that so again, because we need to find an objective way to essentially ration the bus passes. So we started with the families furthest away and worked our way in. We contacted 433 families directly. And out of them, we distributed approximately 22 passes to Pilgrim and 17 passes to Tollgate. Now we're beginning a more general distribution. We'll work with the schools to do things like have an all call and basically offer the passes to students who need them. And then I would encourage the families, if anybody's listening and want to spread the word, it's a nifty deal because the passes are not just for school. They're monthly passes. You can use the bus, on the weekends. You don't have to go back and forth to the school. For instance, if you're coming from Tollgate, for instance, and need to stop at the library instead of going home, you can do that, or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and I want to encourage folks to take advantage of the program. The passes, as soon as we've been identifying folks, we've been either dropping them off at their houses or putting them in the mail. So we're getting them into the students' hands as fast as we can. Some students, as we were calling, already are using RIPTA, which was great to hear. And several DL students, they were DL only, they're planning to return back to the classroom as a result. So again, small victories there. So we were happy about that. RIPTA, we continue to work with RIPTA to see where else they can help us. Right now, we're using their existing routes. They've been trying to add buses where they can to add capacity because, again, they have the same COVID restrictions that we do and we face. I just wanted to put this up. For instance, this is what they're using for their bus 3 and 4 to help us transport folks to Pilgrim. And they put together this customized brochure with the morning and the afternoon timelines and the map of where the routes run and where the major stops are. But they stop all along Warwick Ave and West Shore Road. They did the same thing for Tollgate. So again, Tollgate, we're picking up students, from more of an east to west, diagram, east to west direction, and then the same thing. And we've had some flexibility on our end. Ms. Calori is, dismissing folks who need to catch this bus about 10 minutes early so that they can get to the bus stop on time and pull the bus. So we're being flexible and we're trying to make things work. And if it's a success, we'll keep this going in next year as well. So that's where we're at. Thank you very much. I'll entertain any questions.
Madam Chair, I have just, I think, a couple from Mr. Baxter.
Okay, Mr. Baxter.
And I know it's getting late, but I just have questions. We're still trying to fill those 14 buses with first student. We've been unsuccessful in finding drivers, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And I know I asked you this in an email. I'm going to assume that first student has some of their employees on unemployment, right? And you just can't force them to come back, or am I wrong?
Nope, you're 100% right. And thank goodness, right, the federal government has, implemented unemployment assistance programs, but those programs also make, provide an incentive in some cases for the bus drivers to not resume their routes. Exactly.
Right, exactly. It's a distorted system, to be kind, where you can make more by not doing the job you did than you do when you do the job you do. Only in America, I guess. And as far as those 14 buses, we're not paying for them if they're not running, right?
Yes, that's correct. We do not pay for buses unless they're on the road. That is correct.
And then I know I had sent you an email about a conversation I had with a constituent. And they floated the idea of if RIPTA drivers, either on days off or on off shifts, could cover for student shifts. But I think you said that you've been trying to work with RIPTA in many different ways. But
Yeah, so
too.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But they must have problems too, because they need more drivers to run the same people.
Yeah.
If you're going to-
Yeah, so exactly. So we did have conversations. They do face the exact same challenges that we had and that we face. Some of the comments were, for instance, that they see when we explored maybe some flexibility, or is there somebody there, they have the same challenges, the same shortages, if you will, the same bus restrictions. And then also on top of those, we ran into, or I learned about a few other challenges. One is, it is two different driver unions, so that causes some complication, although it's not impossible to overcome. And the second is the what I'll call the demographic of the driver, and the way it was described to me is, folks might start, and what they've seen is folks might start driving school buses because the flexibility and the pay, but there's no benefits, and then they'll eventually move to driving RIPTA because it's a little bit more steady and there's better benefits, and so they're reluctant to go back. And and that makes sense to me. So anyways, it's I don't think that's going to be a significant solution or option for us to bring drivers back and to get those 14 buses on the road.
Okay, and the last thing I had is, in your presentation, you've got that the maximum number of students per bus is 22. I thought the Department of Ed had changed that in the summer. Didn't they increase that to like 30 or 36?
No, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It does say that there's a number about 36 in there, and we've been in January when we were exploring getting our buses back on the road, if you will, for the opening in January, which we had several conversations with EDOC, and the governing factor was still the spacing. So you could put up to 36 as long as you maintain the spacing and the ratios. And in our case, the ratio is that, with the spacing gets us to 22 people on the bus. So it's not 36. We ran down that rabbit hole, and we thought it might have been a great boon for us, but it didn't turn out that way.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Now, I have a question regarding the CTC shuttles going from Pilgrim to Tollgate CTC.
Yes.
I know that they were put in February. Are they going to continue next year doing that?
Honestly, we to be honest, we are just starting to put pen to paper, if you will, for what our transportation model will look like next year as we enter budget season. And to be honest, we hadn't gotten to that, so we haven't thought about it one way or the other. We do.
I'm getting inquiries on that.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say if it's a solution that works and that the community desires and it's a benefit, then and it seems to be more efficient than the way we did things in the past, then I would say sure, let's we'll certainly explore it, and if it makes sense, we'll keep it. I'm all for that, and just a little foreshadowing is that we are, although our budget plan is for based on the way we used to do things, we are actively working. We're starting now working on redesigning our routes, starting from a blank sheet of paper, if you will, And then we're starting now because it's going to take a while to basically apply the lessons that we've learned going through this process, that this COVID rationing of transportation, because we have learned how to be quite a bit more efficient, and hopefully we'll not only be able to reduce some of our transportation expenditures, maybe a little bit, but also provide some additional new services to the community. So stay tuned. We're working on it, and but we're still early in the conceptual stage.
I definitely think it's something we should look at.
Yep, absolutely.
And possibly keep, because I think some kids would like to go to the CTC if they can stay at their home school, since they've already done their freshman year there. I got parents.
No.
That's not what the shuttle does.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. No, so this is exactly the opposite. What this does is so that the CTC kids are taking their what I'll call the core classes at Tollgate, and this shuttle picks them up
But it takes them back to the neighborhood, correct?
at the end of the school day. But all of their classes are taken at the Tollgate.
Right, but they want to go back. The parents are having a hard time with transportation. I know that some kids do that, and they have cars, they drive, but for the kids that are in 10th grade, the parents are hesitant to put them there because they're worried about how they're gonna get home.
Yeah, I'm with you, and this would address that need. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I have people calling me now for that.
But, excuse me,
Yes, Bacchus.
Ms. Cobb, a couple of years ago, we voted that all students attending career and tech go to Tollgate. This was before your time, go to Tollgate for their academic studies. And so I don't
They're
know.
worried about the busing. That's the questions I'm getting.
Well, busing is different. You can understand that.
Mr. Baxter, I have another question for you. As I mentioned, I asked Dr. Thornton, as people get inoculated, do you think that the number is going to change for how many we can have on a bus? And if that does go up, will we be doing better? Or are we going to have to keep the same restrictions?
Well, so as recently as this week, I've talked to my contact at the Department of Health and asked him exactly that question. Does he foresee changing in the social distancing requirement on I was specific on the school buses, and not that my contact is privy to everything, but he says he did not anticipate it before the end of the school year. So if it happens, so right now our mode is steady as she goes. If the change does occur, we'd have to look at the timing and how much time would be left at the end of between then and the end of the school year, and if a change makes sense. It takes us, if you remember, when we opened, the transportation followed by almost a month. It takes us quite a while, more like 4 to 6 weeks to make a drastic, revision of the routes like that. And
I understand that.
if it's close to the end of the year, probably our intent would be to keep going the way we're at, because we, again, like I mentioned, we're using this time to get a head start on revamping our routes for September.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baxter. Any other questions on the busing, transportation? Okay, move along, discussing action, RIDE 21-22 school calendar, Dr. Thornton.
Madam Chair, just really quickly, in your packet, you have the calendar. I would ask tonight just discussion only, no action. Simply stated, this is the RIDE recommended calendar. The Superintendent Association still has questions on the draft. The questions revolve around PD days which the state is recommending we have at the front end of the school year in September. The challenge we have is they're recommending PD days to also count as instructional days for students in the first 2 days of the year. So we've asked the question, how would we do that if the teachers haven't met their students yet? How could they, institute an instructional day, having not seen the kids yet? That doesn't make sense. So we're looking to, relocate those days. Also in the calendar, you'll see other PD days. One is in March, one is in May, and certainly the holidays, Jewish holidays, the 7th and 16th. One thought we have is if we did move PD days, you could start September 1st, orientation day, August 31st. If you did that, your 180th day is June 16th. But keep in mind now, the new paradigm is snow days should not complicate our calendars anymore in 2022 and beyond, because we'll have a distance learning day, and June 16th could be a hard number, June 16th, last day. So I'll bring it back next month for action once Rye clarifies this idea of PD/instructional day. Because to us, like I said, this really sounds more like a 178-day school year with 2
Right.
PD days. So we want to really look at that and change that.
Thank you for paying attention to the Jewish holidays and for all those concerned. And I have gotten messages, it's not going to happen on the 7th or the 16th. Thank you. The next is the discussion and update, securing architect services for high school projects. Mr. Ferrucci.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Good evening, school committee members, members of the community. I'd like to share the screen because I have a timeline that I would like to review with you. I know it's getting late, so we'll try and expedite it. I have it up on my screen. Does it appear?
No.
What do I need to do? I do share screen.
Yep.
Here we go. How about now?
There it is.
Super. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. The school committee in December has moved forward with exploring the high school projects that were put in abeyance because of COVID. The superintendent has asked me to assist in the planning of the high school rollout. So this presentation is on behalf of administration for the Warwick schools, not on behalf of the building committee, of which I'm currently chair. So this is a separate activity that I'm taking on with school administration. And typically, I'm gonna get caught up first of all. So the school committee moved forward in December saying we're going to take a look at the high school project. In January, Frank Locker, who is the consultant that the school committee has hired, has moved forward with the discussion with new city leadership to get them up to speed as to what transpired last spring before we shut down because of the pandemic. And what we've developed is a timeline of moving the project forward. So tonight I'm presenting the timeline between now and what I'm projecting through November 2022, if the school committee decides to adopt a high school plan that would require voter support. So as we speak this evening, Mr. Locker is prepared to present the community consensus report that he developed last spring and then got more validation recently in meeting with city leadership. And so we've got feedback from new members that have been voted into the positions of leadership. He will at that meeting, in fact, show 5 or 6 different plans for each of the 2 high schools and then make his recommendation based on all the feedback he's collected. That's tentatively scheduled for March 23rd. There's an opportunity for the community to weigh in on the options that are being presented. I, at the time, was putting a to be decided, but I believe on your agenda, you're anticipating possibly March 30th. This would be the opportunity for the community, after hearing what happens on the 23rd, to communicate with school committee members of their wishes, and then also speak out publicly as to what they believe should happen with the high school projects. We've got a school committee meeting, the regular meeting scheduled for April 13th. It's hopeful that the school committee will, in fact, make a decision about what to do with the high school projects. either adopt the presentation that Mr. Locke is recommending, provide an alternative project. Maybe there's one of the other options that the community would actually rather pursue, or in fact, put it on hold. In the event that the school committee doesn't adopt a plan on that meeting on the 13th, administration wants to be prepared to move forward. And what we're doing today, so this evening, I'm advising you that administration has prepared an architect and engineering firm RFQ. It's going out on the street tomorrow. What we'll be seeking is an architect and engineering firm to assist us with a stage 1, stage 2 submission to RIDE for housing aid, as well as become the architect firm that's going to develop the plans and also assist us in providing information regarding the potential for a voter referendum in November 2022. We currently have an architect that we're working with on the phase 1 and phase 2. They've got $96 million worth of projects. We will be looking at their capability of taking on the project of this size and scope. Right now, round figures, we're looking at about a $300 million project between the two high schools. We would also suspect that there may be other architectural firms who weren't involved with us early on because the scope might have been something that they would pass on. Maybe they have an expertise in renovating high schools of this substance and this size. So administration is going to pull together and start preparing a recommendation for an award of an architect and engineering firm contract. And we'll be prepared for April 13th. The reason why April 13th is critical for this discussion is, again, if there is a plan adopted, and if the intent is to be on the referendum for November 2022, then we need to submit a stage 1 application to the state by September 1, this coming September. A project of $300 million, 2 high schools, will take us the better part of 2.5 to 3 months to create the stage 1 application for RIDE. We would need all of May, June, and July to prepare that document and then vet it in early August. So our target date would be September 1, 2021. We would then seek city council support of our plan come January 2022, because that would then dovetail with the February 1st, 2022 stage 2 application that's required from RIDE. The expectation is that we would then get the state support that they would pay a portion of the project. Currently, we get about 35%. So we're staring at about a $90 to $100 million commitment from the state to take on something of this scope. We hope to have that commitment by mid to tail end of May, and then finally get the state enabling legislation come the end of June. That would all line us up to be able to put a voter referendum before the voters for the November 2022 election date. I'm sorry. That's the reason why we were pushing getting an architect and engineering firm recommendation available for the school committee. If the school committee were to put the high school projects on hold, of course, there'd be no awarding of any contracts. And of course, this is not costing anything for the community or the school department until we make that decision come April. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to let the school committee know that you will be hearing about an RFQ going out on the street and what our intentions were, and that there'd be no cost until the decision's made. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just have one. Thank you. Mr. Ferrucci, nice to see you.
You as well, Mr. Testa.
When you said the reimbursement is 35%, are the incentives still going to be in place for the high school project that are in place for the current projects?
Not as, my understanding is no, they will subside by the end of next calendar year. So we won't have it underway in time.
Okay.
I know there's some dialogue about trying to get it reinstated and/or continued. And so that's what we really have to be chasing at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'm just gonna make a statement or a request that you include seeking the building committee's input on being able to work with the recommended architect before school admin brings it back to the school committee to seek an award for this contract?
That makes sense. Because the building committee works at the direction of the school committee, and the school committee turns over an adopted plan and a bond referendum that supports that plan. That's why we didn't have this happen at the building committee level. But seeking their input on what the administration review team recommends does make sense to make sure that if they've got the expertise of something that they're aware of. So I will be happy to bring that, and it will sequence nicely. The building committee's first meeting is first week of April. We will have our recommendation done before that, and that'll be a whole week before the school committee meeting. So I'll be happy to take care of that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Ferrucci.
Thank you very much.
If no more questions. Number 9, discussion action, contract award, HVAC system design for Lippit. Mr. Ferrucci, Mr. Gothberg.
If I may, because of the technical nature of these, I'm going to defer all the purchases to Mr. Gothberg. It'll expedite the meeting. Mr. Gothberg?
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ferrucci, committee members.
Excuse me, Mr. Gothberg. Mr. Ferrucci, I think you need to stop sharing your screen.
How do I do that?
At the top, if you put your mouse to the top of the screen, a stop share option should appear. It's big and red. Well, not very big, but it's red.
Stop share.
There you go.
I was trying. I have you back on my screen. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, the first one is for Lippit Elementary School HVAC design for Secotio, and it also includes, this one also includes acoustical engineering services required by RIDE for a total of $51,648.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. I guess we should just continue to the next one for Windman. Same thing.
Okay. This is for schematic design for the HVAC project at Women for $72,576.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Great.
Okay. All right, the next one is for commissioning agent services required by RIDE for the Lippit HVAC project for $15,000.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the next one is, I believe this is structural. Let me just check. Yeah. The RIDE is requiring a structural snow load along with their regular structural assessment of the roof as we do the HVAC design to make sure that the roof can handle the structural load. $6,480.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it.
The last one is a series of change orders. RIDE is now requiring, even though we have done cost estimates before, they want independent third-party cost estimates for each project that we do moving forward. So you will see these coming as we move forward for the next couple of years. Also included in this one is a ground penetrating radar scan for the Career and Tech Elevator project. We found that there were non-located underground utilities that we had to find, so we need to do ground penetrating radar to locate them. The total for all the change orders are $26,476. They are within the budget of the bond projects.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it.
And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gothberg.
Thank you.
On to the discussion and update of monthly fiscal report. Requisitions approved from 500 to 4,999.99.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You have the monthly fiscal report. I won't belabor it. We've already talked quite a bit, so I'll just entertain any questions.
Any questions?
No.
I think it's been beaten with a stick at this point. So thank you, Mr. Baxter.
Thank you.
We'll go on to the next discussion action contract award for WACTC supplies. Mr. McCaffrey.
Madam Chair, members of the school committee, in your packets, you'll find a proposal to purchase some new equipment, hand tools and things of that nature for the Career and Tech Center. They are looking to purchase the items from a local company that they've dealt with in the past that has given competitive pricing. That also backs up their product and services equipment as necessary if or when something does break. I recommend moving forward on this purchase.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCaffrey. Discussion action, contract award for curriculum grant, take home books. Mrs. Amelot.
Yes, this is for our Title I schools this is for our schools under CARES Act to have books to take home so that they can increase their library and reading. So to support that.
Okay.
I move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Thank you, Mrs. Amelot. Discussion action, contract award technology, VMware district license, Dr. Taylor.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school committee. What we have here before you is the renewal of our annual license for the VMware program. What the VMware program does is it allows all of our CAD labs in the district to remote virtual desktop, which is how that program is delivered to the students. And you'll notice on both 17A and 17B, it's two parts to the same piece. On 17B, that's the renewal of the program. We had that renewal due back in October. And what we did is we shopped around, got a little bit better pricing on the renewal.
Wonderful.
And in addition, by switching over to the vendor, as you see in my memo, we were able to save a few $1,000s on service hours by rolling it into our managed contract services and not paying a separate company to do that for us. So overall, we had a savings. The reason why there's also a 17A is because there's a small piece to that VMware program that was due up in January. And so that's the additional piece in January, plus to co-term the other pieces together so that next January, the entire program expires as opposed to being pieced out. So I respectfully request approval.
Move approval on 17A and B.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
And thank you for shopping around, trying to save money.
My pleasure. Thank
We
you.
appreciate that. Okay, we're skipping number 18 because we actually already voted on that. Discussion action, contract award maintenance, plow and rubber deflector, Mr. Oliver.
Good evening. I'm requesting your approval on this contract. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. And the next one is also yours for maintenance and truck repairs.
Requesting your approval on this contract. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Discussion action, contract award, special services, hearing impaired services, Dr. Conley.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school committee. You may recall several months ago, I requested approval for services through the Clark School for the Deaf for one of our teachers of the deaf and hearing impaired who was out on leave. By the time we got that contract through, unfortunately, the substitute they had for us was no longer available. We did reach out to the Northern Rhode Island Collaborative. They do have a teacher of the deaf that is able to support us. In the meantime, our teacher has returned, but we are looking at potential compensatory services for the students. So I would like to continue to have Northern Rhode Island Collaborative be available to support us because as I explained before, this is a really difficult position to fill. So I do anticipate the contract will be significantly less now, and I respectfully request your approval. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Conley. Okay, discussion action, contract award curriculum grant URI dyslexia cohort.
This is
Mrs.
to, this is part of the CLSD competitive grant. And this is for our secondary teachers who are part of the dyslexia cohort. I seek approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Second, I just have one comment.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ms. Amela. I just can't say how happy I am. The state finally got around to recognizing dyslexia for what it is, and that we're fortunate to be able to have teachers to get trained in that. I happen to know, friends whose kids, when they were in school, were dyslexic, and there was really nothing much that could be done for them. So I'm glad to see that has changed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion's on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you,
Aye.
Jim. Go with those grants. Next one, contract award technology, Promethean brackets, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we have here before you this evening is one of the final pieces to our Promethean board installation project. I'd be remiss not to thank Mr. Baxter and his team, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Gothberg, for all their organization on this project. This is a very ingenious way to install these Promethean boards with a specialized bracket that Mr. Baxter and his team went out and had engineered for this project, so that we do not need to spend the time and the labor and the energy drilling through the slate boards. I'll defer to Mr. Oliver and Mr. Baxter on any more specifics on that, but we'd respectfully request your approval this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, on to the next one.
May I, Madam Chair,
Yes,
may I ask that Mr. McCaffrey address all four of these? And then we'll vote on them.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Absolutely. In your folders, you'll find 4 different proposals for increasing technology within our secondary schools. You should see 2 robotics labs for the middle level. You should also see a CAD lab at the Career and Tech Center.
Yeah.
As well as, just verify my notes here. As well as AP Computer Lab equipment at Pilgrim, where there would be equity between Pilgrim and Tollgate. Since earlier in the year, we increased the technology for the AP Computer Lab at Tollgate. We want to do the same for Pilgrim so that there's equity. And I believe the other purchase was for CAD labs at Pilgrim and Tollgate in the middle level as well.
Mr. McCaffrey, electronics lab.
Yes, I mentioned that earlier, the lab at the Career and Tech Center. That you should see a memo there concerning the electronics lab at the Career and Tech Center. It's lab bid 2111. And with that purchase, it's grant funded, and we're looking to increase the technology within the program. The computers that are in the program are outdated. They can't support the software that's being utilized within the room. It's time to upgrade, and it's something necessary to make sure we're current with our technology within that program.
Thank you, Mr. McCaffrey. I move approval on all four.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mr. McCaffrey.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, next are our future meetings. We have a special school committee meeting for March 23rd at 6 PM. We're waiting for, this is a tentative date for the community forum for the high school project on March 30th at 6 PM. That is tentative. The Health and Wellness Subcommittee meeting is on March 31st at 4 PM. And the monthly school committee will be April 13th, of this year. I don't know, I'm tired. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. I know it's late.